in physics one talks of entropy. It is the process by which the order which is there implanted within disintegrates. The pattern is that there is disintegration of order. And so it is that when one sees the contrary happening, one has to presume that there is a power greater than the natural order of things, reversing natural tendency of things. The natural physicist and thinker William Paley, 2 or 3 centuries ago by now, already had a word to this in his teaching, which was purely philosophical but valid for faith, that if one goes along and picks up this or that object, there's no big deal. If one goes along and suddenly comes across a watch, opens it up and sees it working perfectly, then the situation is notably different. The question then cannot be avoided: who made it? And so it is that what is referred to as the deism of the period cannot be avoided even on the philosophical plane. It was a problem already seen before the crumbling of the communist bloc, when high-powered physicists were obliged to toe the party line and deny what their science was teaching them to be the evidence. There is order. And that order also is a personal order which is concerned for our disorder as human beings. One time in student days we were in prayer, and it was a charismatic setting, and I remember somebody being given this word of knowledge, that there were some here who were concerned about money issues, and the Lord was telling them it's not a problem for him. That can be translated to our situation here. It might be not necessarily a money issue, but certainly an issue in the temporal sphere that could be taking away our peace precisely because we have a limited vision and are behaving as though the universe depended on us. Our truth is that it doesn't. We are dependent on the one who made us, and therefore we have stewardship. We have not command but stewardship, and it has to be a responsible stewardship. Not just money, but that's already an important one, but also time. Time has to be stewarded. It's only coming once, and therefore it belongs to him. If we are his, we hand it back and ask that he reign upon it, and therefore we submit to his will. Before engaging, before accepting some activity or spending some evening in some specific way, we cast it before him, if he is Lord. Therefore, with regard to big decisions in life, it does matter. And it's important to have the reaction when somebody asks us to do something, not necessarily to reply on the spur of the moment, but to have just that liberty to let the Lord have a word in, and therefore one has the right to say, can I just think about that first, and then in the meantime to bring it to the Lord. And then the chances are that it would be the right decision, because we only have one life, and generous souls make that big mistake. They can't say no, and therefore they're actually obliged all the time to be outside themselves, and their own quality life is suffering. Activism, holy activism. It also applies to the degree in which we engage. If one notices a soul who is interiorized and therefore more open to the contemplative element, that soul tendentially, not always, but tendentially, will not be the one to be always talking in any conversation that happens to be going on. A person who is receptive before God is receptive also before man, and therefore the same mode of engagement is present, a certain peacefulness and openness with regard to the pores of the soul. A person, on the other hand, who cannot in any way not be in charge of a conversation is in output mode even there. And a noisy person is difficult to pacify and even to get through to, both by God and man. So learn that bit too. In a conversation, it doesn't have to be our work. This applies also to what is going on inside us. The quality of our life depends on what we allow into it. And what comes into our life comes into our soul. So it's important that we are in command of what comes into our soul. It's very important not to be just passively taking in all that might come at us. Don't watch passively a computer or a television. Decide beforehand what you are there for. Do it and come from it. It's now the big pitfall of Christians in the West. They're not hearing the Lord. They're hearing too many words, and the words are losing their cutting edge. Learn the power of a book. Learn the virginity of the air and silence heard without anything at all but the book in your hands. It becomes a different mode of engagement with life. Why? You're in control of the book. A screen is in control of you. That's a vastly different mode of operation. Now, be careful also of the other bit. It's not the same with regard to the interior life if one is always available. And being available now actually is very physical. It's in your pocket. You don't have to be available all the time. It's possible to live with the phone on only when we want it on. Already years ago in France, I heard this when enclosed. It was the debate going on in the Trappist order with regard to, and this is years ago now, already in the 70s, 80s, should there be immediate availability through a bleep in the pocket. In those days, the question was this: if the abbot and office master, anyone in control of some situation is needed, you can, if you want, get him by putting in his breast pocket a bleep system, which will get him at the point and get him to go to a phone or whatever it might be. You can get your man. But one of the great abbots in France at the time, André Louf, he's now deceased, abbot of Mont-des-Cats, he was an author also and a recognized spiritual father in the country, and he absolutely refused it in his monastery, one of the largest in France, for this motive, that it ruins one's freedom. One is only available to one person, whether it's Jesus Christ or whether it's the person before us, at one point. Another person has no right to jump the queue and to come just between you and the other person, or the Lord himself at that point. It's a different mode of existence. And he refused it. I know also that in Ireland right now, there's still one Cistercian monastery which has still always refused a television in the house. It's the one I know best, Roscrea. The successor of Dom Colum Kilmer, through one or two others in the meantime, Dom Richard, has still refused it. He will not have that machine in the enclosure. And there's a good reason for it. If one puts that thing in a place, the atmosphere changes. The noise level increases, the laughter in it comes through and changes the atmosphere of the house of God. The number of words coming into a quiet place increases rapidly and has a huge impact on the imagination of a quiet monk. It damages profoundly the soul. It's the Trojan horse. It gets right into the heart of a monastery and a house, and of the soul itself. Be careful of the screen. It's the emitter of Satan, and often plugged into. the jaws of hell. Do we want it in our house and home, and therefore in our soul? If it's there, there's a secret. It's called the on and off switch. That's more powerful than most people who have the goggle box available. It's the same principle with the mobile phone. The on and off position is powerful. And some people can't just have it completely off, even adoration. It has to be just available in case, at least via text. I remember seeing in Italy, in one church, this sign as one went into church. There was a picture of a mobile phone, and it said this as a caption, to the effect that the Lord was saying, if you want me, you can't have this. So we can't listen to two voices at the same time if one of them is the still, small voice. He is very gentle and needs a gentle soul with great depths of interiority to be perceived. Which leads me to where I want to finish. To be perceived, one needs to sharpen the antennae of the soul. In the charismatic renewal, there is a huge attention given to the sharpening of the soul, to such an extent that one picks up all the tiny inspirations and nudges, and eventually even the tiny sparks of intuition might be directly from the Holy Spirit. E.g., a person is there before us, and we might somehow get a little flash, keep asking a certain question, and that's where the problem might be. In other words, again, not talking and saying what we know, but waiting to get to the actual problem. It's a different mode of engagement, but it can be sharpened. We can sharpen our awareness and acquire, if God wishes it, a certain mode of knowledge. Intuition greatly sharpened. Picking up things, picking up what is being said without being said, looking into a person's eyes, his forehead, his facial expressions, and detecting what perhaps is going on there. A person who is aware sees a lot in a face and hears a lot in a word. A person who's already preoccupied with the next thing to say is missing it all. He's in output, output, output. A person who is passive and listening and poor is like a magnet. He's drawing things into him. Which do we want? The same mode of reception for the Blessed Sacrament applies. I just conclude. It's precisely the same problem with regard to the Lord himself. I just happened to be talking the other day to a person who said this, en passant, in a conversation. A good person of adoration and prayer. But she did say this, and I picked it up, with regard to the thrill of having good reading material, which, by the way, was linked to the fact that not many people read now because it's all on screen, or YouTube. And she made this remark, that if one picks up something interesting during adoration, the time just goes. Well, I thought, that's an interesting comment. She doesn't realize what she's saying. The time just goes. In other words, as though it were a way of killing the time and disengaging with the true methodology of adoration, which is precisely taking the risk of having no barrier and no distraction, just a pure vacuum in which the Lord can at last get through. We're blocking out even our vacuum. We can't bear the emptiness. So I just finish. Listen to what the Spirit is trying to say. For that to happen, step back a bit.